Hi
hey everybody!
Friends. It's time for another What We Read
That's
video.
right.
We're going to talk about more books that we read.
Yeah, just a few more.
Alright, so I guess we're going to start with me.
That's right.
Usual.
As per the usual.
Alright, we're going to talk about the one ebook that I need to feature, which is also a January release. That book is Seven Deadly Shadows, which is by Courtney Alameda and Valen E. Maitani. This is their collaborative effort to tell a YA fantasy story that is inspired by Japanese legends and folklore. I'm gonna come right off the bat and say it that the premise sounds right out of an anime. The main character is Kira Fujikawa, and she has grown up working as a shrine maiden, shrine priestess, at her family's shrine, honoring her familial legacy, even though her parents are not really big on that. It's her grandfather who is. One night, the shrine gets attacked by a bunch of yokai.
Yokai. Yeah, Shrine Maiden plus yokai equals...
Yeah, wait for it.
That's an
so her grandfather gets murdered, and now it's up to Kira to protect her family's shrine and also prevent the end of the world, because the reason they attack the shrine is because they think there is a piece of a sword that a demon can use to make the world go dark. Basically.
Oh, hey, then yeah.
So, it sounds right out of an anime.
Sounds great.
Unsurprisingly, I flew through that book because it reads like an anime. There is a lot going on because Kira has to figure out, like, how to really embrace her own abilities as a shrine priestess, because she was starting her training, but she wasn't quite there yet. She also has to find more allies to fight in this war with her, and she has to figure out how to get a magical sword in her possession, so lots of things going on here, and it was so much fun to read. I love a good quest story, especially if it has Japanese folklore elements in it, and this book totally delivered on that. It was funny because while I was reading it, I was like, it reminds me of this anime, it reminds me of this manga, and then at the end of it, there's like an author's note and they list everything that they were inspired by, and I'm like, unsurprised! They had Sailor Moon on there because her sort of priestess attitude kind of reminds me of Mars, just a teensy bit.
Just a teensy bit.
Just a little. And then they had Bleach on there, which was so unsurprising to me because I was just like, yep, this sounds right out of Bleach. They had a couple of clamp titles on there, they had Inuyasha on there, so if you like any of those things, you may enjoy the story as much as I did.
Very well.
While I can't exactly say it's a new favorite, I do think that it was very, very entertaining. It actually is a standalone. It ends at the end of the book, which is really nice, so definitely check it out if you're looking for a fun YA fantasy that has Japanese inspiration in it. The other book that I'm gonna talk about is a sequel, a companion novel sequel really, and it's called Lover or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. This is the second book in the Hot and Hammered series. Lover or Lose Her actually features a couple that was mentioned in the first book. It's Rosie and Dominic, and they are having marital problems in this one. At the very beginning, Rosie has decided that she wants a divorce. Before that actually happens, they decide to give it one last shot and to figure out if they can work through their issues, also with the help of therapy. I actually really enjoyed this story. I was a little hesitant going into it because I had seen a couple of people be like they didn't like it as much as the first one, but I actually liked it just as much, if maybe not a little more. I think what appealed to me the most about it is because in this book, we kind of see how two people who are so at odds with each other and are having difficulties communicating unpack that and just figure out like what's really going on in their heads, how they're misunderstanding each other, what they need to do in order to communicate their love better with one another. And that really, really worked for me. They also had an insane amount of chemistry, which is always a welcome thing in any romance read. It's not a perfect book, I would say, but it's also really it just made me think a lot and made me nod my head a lot because I agreed with a lot of the stuff in it. So that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great follow-up to Fix Her Up, which is the first book, so you should definitely check this out. And one last book that we are going to talk about is Lucky Caller by Emma Mills. This story is about Nina. It's a little bit quieter than most of the other contemporary YA stories, which is, I think, part of the Emma Mills brand here. So Nina is participating in a radio broadcasting class in her senior year, and she and her team have decided that they are going to hold a special event where they're interviewing a special guest. A lot of other stuff happens in the story peripherally, but that is the central big plot line of the story. I like this book, but I don't love it as much as I love Emma Mills's other stories. It was a little too quiet for me, like it felt a little more disjointed and not as well told as some of the others have been. I also think that I just maybe didn't click with the main character Nina as much as I have with some of her other heroines. She felt a little too distanced for me, and I think even though that was part of her personality, it also did not do her any favors when it came to me as someone reading about her. So I didn't quite love that. But I did think the radio broadcasting aspect was pretty fun. There's also sort of a cameo connection between this book and another one, but you find out later on what that is. And I liked how it ended too, because, you know, warm fuzzies are always welcome. So I'm still glad I read it because I do enjoy Emma Mill's books for the most part. I'm just sad I didn't love it as much as I've loved some of her other stuff. Your turn.
Right, and so continuing my foray into the graphic novel binge, I did read a couple of things here. Because Prime Reads apparently is a thing, and there are a lot of graphic novels on there. Randomly, they offered to read, hey, this is recommended for you, a couple of Darth Maul books. And I thought, alright, Darth Maul was just sort of like angry, snarly, sort of like throwaway character from episode 1 that, because everybody loved him so much, had his own sort of thing, and I never really did know what that was about. So I was able to get a chance to see what the now canon Darth Maul, or still canon, shall I say, Darth Maul books were. And one of them is Star Wars Darth Maul, set around the time before Phantom Menace, I want to say, because it just shows sort of his backstory, him sort of testing the reins that the Emperor had put on him, well, Darth Sidious anyway, not the Emperor yet, and for him sort of wanting to kill Jedi. That's all he wanted to do. He wants to avenge the Sith and kill the Jedi, and that's just him sort of turning into the murder baby that he was end up going to be. He does manage to get a chance to like kill a Jedi, and so he goes for it. It's frustrating for me to read stuff like this because it's in the past and I sort of know what happens, but it's nice to know how we got there. It's just you kind of almost want to go, well, okay, we you know, give me something that's, you know, kind of more interesting. But, well, otherwise, it's just your pretty average narrative. Which leads me to Star Wars Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, which I think may have happened in between episodes 1 and 2, because you got Count Dooku, and you have General Grievous on here, and it's just him having survived miraculously, being murdered and cut in half by Obi-Wan Kenobi, and sort of creating his own underground, like, kind of evil organization called Black Sun, and just a bunch of other stuff, and him just failing to get the upper hand against the Emperor and Count Dooku and General Grievous, because, hey, let's face it, those guys survive all the way to episode 3. So to me, reading things within those time periods, within an era of Star Wars, like, now canon, isn't as appealing, I would like to think, because I kind of know that, okay, then, you know, it's not my favorite era, but not a bad read, For those of you who love Darth Maul, this is a great installment for you, and I suggest you go for it. Which now leads me to my next set of reads that involves easily my favorite buddy cop comedy of the pint-sized variety, Super Sons. So I read a couple of Super Sons titles. I want to start with the one that I didn't really like as much, which is Super Sons, The Polar Shield Project. Now, for a bunch of new kids who are sort of getting into sort of DC, the DC imprint Zoom, I think, which doesn't exist anymore. I'm not too sure. I think they removed that imprint. But either way, they're still going to start printing books for like kids. They decided to take the characters of Damian Wayne and Jonathan Kent and put them in a completely different universe that would be a little bit more palatable to the young kids. It was centered around the fact that like there was something weird happening to the environment, which means Superman had to leave for Mars and Batman has to leave for like the moon or something like that, leaving the Super Sons to fend for themselves and move to another city because Gotham and Metropolis were flooded because of the weird climate change stuff that was happening. It was really confusing, or rather I wasn't connecting to it, and it subverts the characters a little bit in that Jonathan... Oh, no, a lot. A hell of a lot. Jonathan is now angsty and like angry and not cinnamon not cinnamon rolly anymore. Like he's not the wide-eyed kind of what'll happen to my powers. That he's lost all of that. He's just angry and stuff. And I get it. I do. It's a little more relatable, but it loses the narrative angle that you're looking for. That's not the kind of story that we came for. But hey, this is the story that we got. Damien, on the other hand, is actually less of a jackass in this one. Which to me is also like, don't get me wrong, I do not like Damian Wayne the way Alexa does, because she does have a soft spot for that particular murder baby, because for many reasons. Murder babies in general. Here, he's not even half as menacing or threatening. There is none of that, because obviously it's a kid show. I mean, you're not going to market you're not going to market a former assassin to a bunch of kids. So did I enjoy it for what it was? Sure. I want to know what happens next. Honestly, would I pay good money for it? Maybe. Unless it goes on sale on Comixology. But do I recommend it to everybody? Probably just kids. But for fans of the Super Sons, which I am leading into next, probably not. Stay away from it. You'll lose the vibe. The extreme polar opposite of I was raised by assassins and to kill people, but now I have to not do that because Dad said so. And Mr. Jonathan Kent, Cinnamon Roll of the Year for the next every year. And I'm speaking specifically of so the Super Sons books I think ran for about two issues, 3 issues, maybe 4, and then it moved on to Adventures of the Super Sons, right, where they're sort of in the full swing of their being like super. And the banter is just great. The banter is magnificent. Damien is such a terrible troll, and John is just indestructible, so it's fine. Like it all pans out. Like he's not really hurting John, but John's like, you did that on purpose, and Damien's like, did I really? And he's not even like sorry. He's not even denying it in any way.
That's you and me.
It has been pointed out to me that that in so many ways, this is what Super Sons is in terms of just the dynamic. There's just a lot of banter, a lot of sarcasm. Damon sort of being in charge, but actually it's John that just finishes the work. So I highly recommend Action Detective. Like, I don't even have to tell you what the plot is. If you loved Super Sons in any way, form, or fashion, if you like the idea of a young boy who is half Kryptonian, half human, that would have been Clark Kent had he been growing up in this day and age, and child who was raised by assassins that is now like actively trying to not kill people just because he can't anymore, because that's what he's trying to do to live up to his father's expectations, and having them be friends. I will quote the previous book where the Justice League looks at these two kids and they're like, you're already doing better than your fathers. Last I heard, they were in a band. I have yet to get to that part, but that's great. Anyway, so that's that. Finally, I read out of nowhere, and I finally finished it, Thor Volume 1, The Goddess of Thunder.
Here we go.
Oh boy, by Jason Aaron. For those of you who don't know or have not heard, there was this huge stretch for, I want to say, a couple of years where Thor, our Thor, and by our Thor I mean like Chris Hemsworth, and not like our, anyway, but Chris, the male sort of actual biological child of Odin, he wasn't worthy of the hammer anymore. That's its own mystery. He becomes Odin's son because he just realizes that I'm not Thor anymore. The first Thor that we see is actually a woman after all of that nonsense, after he just couldn't lift the hammer anymore. The next time we see that hammer, it's in the hands of this woman. Everybody's freaking out about it, both in the book and in real life. And I'll be the first one to say I totally understand it. I talk about this a lot more on the podcast, so you guys listen to my thoughts there. But in summary, it's hard to sort of like the book. I'm very 50-50 about it, because 50% of me is like, I love that a woman is holding this hammer and tearing things up. The other half of me is, boy, is it pandery and meta in the book. It almost reminds me of another thing that I enjoy that is also extremely problematic, which is Iron Fist. There is a limit to how many times you can say, I am the immortal Iron Fist.
Is there? The show asks you, is there?
So it feels that way too. Like, it's just, guys, no, too much of this. That's for me what sort of made it like a 3-star read when it could have been a 5. If they just stopped trying to like insouciantly Captain Marvel it, like, it's fine, guys. It's really awesome the way we're gonna do this. If they just stop doing that, the whole people are gonna complain about it and we're gonna talk about it in the comics, and then other people are gonna appreciate it in the comics, and we're just like, oh, you guys know. They could have just told a story instead of pandered. Oh well, what can we do?
Switching over, it's funny because actually this book is sort of related, weirdly. I finally read Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which is the book that Lauren from Fiction Tea picked for me to read in December. It follows the story of two friends, Victor and Eli, and they're studying together in college. Eli's project ends up being about extraordinaries, who are basically superheroes or supervillains, really. It depends on how you look at them. His project is basically to explore how you make one of those things.
Oh, wow.
And it jumps back and forth between that narrative and the present day narrative where Victor is trying to hunt down Eli and get back at him because he's been in jail for 10 years for something. And you only find out really what happens as the story plays out. This is a pretty fun premise, and I have to say the execution is perfect for it. I think that it plays out exactly as you'd imagine, because it has sort of like a fun, like, back and forth style of like, you only find out so much and then you get transferred to the other timeline. And I like that a lot. I will say the one thing that I did not really, I guess, connect with were the characters, which is unsurprising. They're characters that are perfect for the story, but they're not necessarily characters that I would personally enjoy. It was a good story, however, plot-wise. That much I enjoyed. Again, narrative-wise, I really enjoyed it. Would I reread it? Probably not, because I know how it ends now, so I'm just like, I don't think it would feel as satisfying for me, and I didn't necessarily love like the dialogue in it or come to care for any of the character relationships in it as much as I would have liked. So there is that, but I am glad I finally read it. I will be reading the companion novel sequel sort of thing that comes after it. I'm glad Lauren picked it. I'm glad I finally read it. And the last book that I read in 2019, and also the last book that we're going to talk about today, is The Crossroads of Should and Must, Find and Follow Your Passion by Elle Luna. This is a non-fiction book where Elle Luna pretty much just goes down a deep dive into talking about the crossroads that we face constantly in our life between the things we should do and the things we must do. The things we should do are stuff that we do to, you know, stay alive. Eat, sleep, go to work, you know, make some money. The things we must do are the things that give us life or bring us life, our passions in life, whether it's writing, painting, whatever it happens to be. And she really explores these concepts, and I found it very interesting because she put to words some of the ways that I personally think about this Crossroads. It's also got beautiful like lettering, illustrations, stuff like this. It gives you some advice based on her own journey, and I think it's worth checking out. This one was actually picked for me to read by my sister Rachel in November. I read it really late, but it was the perfect way to end the year, so guess you can't really blame me. I'd recommend checking it out if you're interested in the topic at all. Those are all the things we're featuring in this particular episode of What We Read. If you have checked out any of the books that we read, or if you've read them and want to talk about them, please leave us a comment. We love those, and we will see you guys for another video soon. Bye!
Bye.